Hey everyone, this is Kevin with Die Hard Discipleship, where the rubber meets the road with your faith and God. This is where you can't just have a tire and a road, they go together. So your faith, the scriptures go together, and action makes progress, and action is what not saves you, but proves your faith. And so as we're learning all this information, we're going through Genesis right now. I just really thank you for joining me, going through Genesis, all the stories that don't seem very valid. However, just going over proof, people studying this stuff, archaeology, also the story itself and how it relates to the Bible and Jesus and our faith. And so, right now, last week, we just went over the Table of Nations, like William Albright stated. One of the most historically accurate documents in all of history. So, just the three sons of Noah going out to populate the earth, just an amazing, amazing chapter. And you get all the major languages, all the major civilizations, and that's where you come from. That's where you come from. And so you got these atheists online with millions of subscribers slamming that chapter, thinking it's just worth nothing. And yet, it's really the origins of all man, all mankind, and where they come from. And we looked at some of, I believe it's Dr. Patterson, uh, who has basically shown that all DNA in men and women go back to Adam and Eve. And so you can check out some of his stuff. And I'm sorry, it's not Dr. Patterson, but uh, I'll get it going on one another video. But yeah, he was talking to Tim Mahoney, who has Patterns of Evidence, and they were just describing how we all in our DNA genetics go back to only, three people, Noah's daughter-in-laws, and then ultimately back to Eve, which her name means the mother of all living. And so we're going to continue on with the Tower of Babel, and we're going to start reading. Thank you for joining, and just be prayerful as you're reading along. So let's start with Genesis 11. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And so it's already talking about the people. Noah just rested. His name means comfort, rest from the flood. He's populating the earth. They believe that Tower of Babel is about 106 years, 105 years approximately after the flood. I mean, I'm sure there's some different sources with, a few different time frames. And so now you have a population of the earth. You have people starting to gather together in one place. Doesn't mean everyone was there, but it says that they plain in the land of Shinar, means between two rivers. And so this is around the Babylonian area. And it's near Ur, where Abraham was from, the Chaldeans. And so it's on the southern end of that empire, that kingdom. And these people start settling there. And it says they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. In verse 3. And what's interesting is man used to be smart from the start. We think, and we're taught that, hey, we're cavemen. We came from basically from rocks, non-living matter, just blew up in a big bang from primordial soup. And we just all of a sudden then started evolving to what we are today, and we're going to keep on going. And the Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible's actually opposite that, and it contradicts what you learn in schools. That evolution is false. That evolution is a gimmick to get you to think you're some kind of animal. And these guys were smart from the start. There's many things in this world that show. And just, to go along with the lines of Tower of Babel, we have the pyramids, we have Stonehenge, we have the Mesopotamian ziggurats, and these places they have huge stones that no normal man can lift. So either a complex pulley system or maybe giants like we talked about in the past. You have Stonehenge, these things are aligned with the stars, and they, you know, have many things to do with the stars and the worship of the celestial bodies. You have the ziggurats. This idea of the ziggurat, this thing that they built the Tower of Babel, goes out all over the world. The same, it's like the prototype when Noah's boat is a prototype of many other boats in this world. They see God do it successfully and they go, "Oh, we wanted to copy that because we can make money off of it." So same thing with all these cultures. They take the idea of the ziggurat with their civilizations as they disperse and they start creating these. And then you have Na Adam naming the animals, because he's actually smart. God gave him a brain. Cain building cities. You have in Genesis 4, it starts containing men working with metals and playing musical instruments. You have Noah that's building an ark back in those times. Nimrod that built towers, Tower of Babel, and established empires, multiple ones. So you have men that possess remarkable engineering and construction capabilities, and I've read articles of how they have possible hot air balloons 2,000 years ago. Those hieroglyphics showing that they're possibly the Egyptians were using electricity. And so we're taught that, man's just stupid. We're just these Neanderthals. But even in these Neanderthals, in these places, they have ceremonies for their burial. They have musical instruments. They have tools. They have things that they're using and doing that they wouldn't expect to have. And yet we're being told that, hey, these guys they're dumb and we're getting smarter and smarter. And I'll actually argue the opposite. We're not getting smarter and smarter. It says that wisdom will increase in the future, but actually our morality is growing grosser and grosser and worse, which causes us to turn foolish and naive and not wiser in God's eyes. And so you have a lot of these, you have a lot of these, paganism comes from these things, from ancient Babylon. You have, these things were carried all over the world, these religions, these thoughts, these engineering practices, these mathematical practices were carried from Babel all over the world. And the reason why, some of these towers go up, Tower of Babel, one, Josephus wrote saying that men thought they might escape from, they wanted to escape from another flood, which is really interesting. Whether it's true or not, it's not biblical, but it's what he writes. And some of the reasons were idolatry, fame. If they build the biggest tower, look at our power. It says that in Proverbs, how the rich, their riches, they think it's a wall that protects them. We think that these things, God's not worried about this stuff. You're like ants in an ant farm. He can do whatever he wants, and he will do whatever he wants. And then they also had sacrifice. And so some of these things that went up, just interesting. And these are not coming from stupid men. They're coming from men who know what they're doing. These men that were very highly skilled. And so I just thought it was very, very interesting. So the men in verse 4 says, they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. Now, the word will reach is not really there in the original language. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the whole earth. So it's interesting. They must have knew the warning of God because they're saying we're going to be scattered if, and let's basically rebel. This sounds just like the Battle of Armageddon. Let us rebel against this God. We're going to gather, says these three spirits like frogs go out, gather all the nations, all the kings for the Battle of Armageddon to do battle against the Lord Jesus. Same thing. These guys, hey, come, let us come together. Let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Over the whole earth. And that's what they were. They were scattered all over the earth. And so, just to, before we read the rest of it, this is only 9 verses long. That's verse 4. But before we get into the rest of it, some locations. There's a doctor, Dr. Petrovic, Douglas Petrovic. You can see him. Genesis is history. He's got some talks out there. He's been studying the Middle Near East, Middle Near East for 20 plus years, and he's done a lot of work on Tower of Babel. He's got some talks on it. Like I said, he basically says there's about 8 or 9 locations where we think the Tower of Babel, but there's really only one that matches all the criteria, which is really, really interesting if you look into it. Um, and some of the specifics, he believes it's on the site of Eridu. It's in the southeastern part, very southeastern part of the Babylonian between not between the two rivers where they were settling, but right under the two rivers there. And if you look at where is, where Abraham came from, that is northeast of where Eridu is. Eridu is Eridu. And it's really interesting. It's southeast of Mesopotamia. And it's right in the same proximity as where Ur of the Chaldeans is, which is again interesting where that's where Abraham was. And one of the reasons why they think it was Urdu is because some of the historical references that are in the literature refer Urdu as Babel, is one of the things. Other things is they've documented basically dispersions. There's two huge dispersions around that time, and there's two movements of people in Mesopotamia, primarily centered around the city of Uruk or Ruk. And there's evidence that this paganism originated from ancient Babylon, associated in this area. And some of the archaeological findings is the original bricks found at the site. Though it wasn't complete, they have and it's interesting because they have this foundation. There's a gold mine of artifacts there, a gold mine, and the surrounding areas, right? If this is true, if this story is true, we're going to see something that resembles a start, a finish, or, in progress, a tower. And then we're going to find, bowls and artifacts because people had to live there for a time. And then we're going to find those things dispersed along with the knowledge and the stories that came from there. And that's exactly what we find. There's a gold mine of artifacts. And I was trying to think of that artifact, and I don't know how to pronounce this stuff, but the Shoin collection. Again, it's one of the oldest records. It's an inscribed stele, which is sort of like a tablet, has a picture of Nebuchadnezzar II and the image of a virtually completed tower. And and that's just showing that this tower was referenced way back then. The type of artifacts that they find there and they found are beveled rim bowls, spouted jars. There's tablets, precursors to writing for accounting. So they're the cuneiform tablets that they're taking notes on. They're scratching, they're counting with them. And what's interesting is they find these things north, where Urdu is, but north, south, east, and west. So this stuff just is scattered, and it's the same bowls, same jars, same cuneiform writing. And they even find that at the time of Abraham, which is another 100 or so years after the Tower of Babel, and it's southeast. Sorry, not south, it's northeast of where Urdu is. But they're finding this all over surrounding Urdu, which is really, really interesting. Some other things that they find are these emergence. They found languages that just come out of nowhere. Remember, all the root languages, we talked about some of this, they believe that there would be a minimum of about 78 root family languages. Remember, Eber was one of the, I want to say, grandsons of Noah. He's the one that basically Hebrew came from, and Mirzam came with, founded Egypt, and, all these major societies came from the Table of Nations, and all these people split, and they're, and so right now, all in that area, they're finding those same jars, those same bowls. So they know that there's this rapid dispersion right in that area. And they find an emergence of these languages without clear origins. They're just sort of like out of nowhere. And their findings across the ancient Near East, particularly in the Western region, they're finding the same things, those same artifacts. And then another thing that they find is evidence of attacks on existing communities. They're finding existing attacks. So not everyone was at the Tower of Babel. So then when there's these other people group that are not at the Tower of Babel, but these people are starting to spread, then you see these attacks out of nowhere. But then you also see cities being built on virgin soil, all in these areas. And when everything is starting to split, which is really, really cool. The Rook expansion, it's a dispersal of people, again, Lake Rook expansion in north, south, east, and west. It was a rapid abandonment. It was like overnight that these people just left. And as you read this, it says, hey, we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Verse 5, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Look at God is watching what each of us are doing. He's watching this world. Not to say he's micromanaging everything, but just like the flood, he came down and said he saw the violence. His heart was grieved. He saw how men were treating other people. Men were treating men. He says, hey, this wickedness, it's grieving me. I've got to do something with this. Same thing. He comes down again. Man is rebelling. It doesn't talk about the rebellion, but the tower is, hey, see, they were supposed to go abroad, be fruitful, multiply, spread, but they're like, no, let's come together. Let's build this city. Let's do this, or we will be dispersed. And they're afraid. They're not obeying the commands of God. They're not obeying the commands of God. And so with this, they find, again, the attacks on the existing communities. They're finding cities being built on new soils. They're finding this expansion, the dispersal of people very quick, very rapidly. And when they're finding these bowls, when they're finding these artifacts, there's very little change in them. There's very little change in them. The artifacts are not changing, even though different languages are coming, they're still using the same items that they did at the Tower of Babel. So with that, um, the comparison, there was another expansion, but it didn't produce the same things that this said. They didn't show the same artifacts. It didn't show, other nations being attacked and then them starting cities on virgin soils. And then eventually you start seeing in this expansion that we're discussing, you start seeing distinct languages appearing suddenly. Basically, you start seeing segregation. Just like you would in New York, you'd see, Chinatown or Little Italy. Now everyone's speaking a different language. So it's the first time that people are actually seeing segregated peoples. So the temple, let's talk about the temple a little. Um, the Lord said, behold, they are one people and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. So he commanded them to do something. They didn't do it, so guess what he did? He spread them out. And the interesting thing about the temple structure is they can tell that it had about 18 distinct phases of construction. They had a foundation, and then they had the top they were working at another site right next door. And when they got to the final stage, the final phase shows that it was all abandoned. And so again, it was a large foundation platform initially established, and later it was later completed and transformed into a ziggurat. So it wasn't completed by these people, but later it was completed down in history, and you can actually, study some of those things. So some of there was a lot of global influence because the same people, again, that are going with these ideas of a ziggurat. And so they take that wherever they go, South America, North America, China, Australia, and all over the world, you have some form or shape of these ziggurats. Not only that, but you also have some form or shape of these stories that are in the Bible, the creation story, the fall, the flood, um, giants, the dispersion, the Tower of Babel. And people are talking about this, but sometimes with our culture and civilization, the story takes a turn and it's different. But all these people know that there was some kind of flood. They know that there was some kind of creation by God. These people know that um, God gave man the breath of life because at this final temple structure, they all had to disperse. They were gone. They all spoke different languages, and now they were left the site. So pretty cool. Some historical figures. Nimrod. Nimrod was a big part of this. And from what Dr. Petrovic says and has studied, he believes that he is the same as Sargon of Akkad. because of the historical references and the things that he does, he believes he's the same person. There's a correlation between him and Sargon with the artifacts and historical accounts. He was recognized as the first empire builder. Um, there's alignment with biblical narrative regarding the post-Babel dispersion. And so there's some things that just that line up with these two. And Nimrod, that he believes that that's Nimrod, and he's the one that built multiple civilizations. It started multiple civilizations. And so with that, sorry, a little tired today. Um, let's talk about Abraham just a little. Abraham, again, he was in the third millennium BC. They believe he was about 100 years or so after Babel, about a couple hundred years after the flood. He was residing in Ur, which was, again, northeast of Urdu, not very far away in the same proximity. But again, during the time of Abraham, around in that region, they find the same pottery, the same jar spouts, the same cuneiform tablets. And guess what? The same stories of these floods, these creations, same story of the fall, same story of the Tower of Babel. It does not change no matter which direction they went. And it's pretty cool because they see these minimal changes in the pottery styles, reflecting the continuity, the continuing of the Tower of Babel stories and artifacts and things like that. Um, So I just want to go over a short line of. So they believe that the flood. Now, depending on who you read, but it's they're pretty close together. Uh, one say the flood's around 2242. Another resource I read was about 2348. And then Tower of Babel was about 106 years after the flood. What's amazing is you see then these huge societies come up after those times. So the flood, then the Tower of Babel, and then guess what? Then you have Babylon come on scene, and then you have Egypt come on scene, and you have Greece come on scene. And it's interesting how these big societies and civilizations did not start until after the time of the flood and the Tower of Babel. They couldn't have because then these people fled, dispersed once the language was confused and then started to settle. Remember, Japheth went to he was the father of the European nations, and then he went up to Siberia and Russia, and then you had Ham go over to East Asia and Ham going to Africa, and then you had the Shemites, where we get the Semitic languages take over Mesopotamia, and so you had all these people go, and then all these stories, and it's no wonder why we talked about creation that you get a creation story on seven. We talked about the seven tablets that Babylon had. One was referencing a creation day, and then the last one said, that everything was good, praise God, pretty much went along with the creation in Babylon because these people knew the creation account. They understood it. They heard those stories and they walked with them and they took those with them. And these people would have spread out on land bridges. Remember when we talked about the ice age? Some scientists believe that when there was more ice on the earth, um, because of the volcano, the ash, the aerosols block the sun and then cause summers to be a little more cool and eventually just snow and snow, and that snow never melted and just eventually created an ice age for several years to come, about 700 years or so. And they believe at that time when there's more ice on the land that the ocean was down about 400 to 500 feet, and so which would have produced land bridges for people to go, and that would have been people would have been able to get to the Americas, but there also was people with knowledge to build boats because Noah did. So Noah would have passed down that down to his son helped him do it. So these people would have knowledge to take boats across the ocean as well. Wouldn't have been an issue for some of the people. And so an amazing account if you just bring this all together in the timeline. So we have the creation and God's salvation in the creation. And we have the fall and how he gave his promise that the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent. And then you had the flood and how God produced an ark with one door, and he says, come into the ark, now go, be fruitful, and multiply. Just like Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. I'll give you rest for your souls. Now go, be fruitful, and multiply. Go make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And now you have the table of nations and you have Jesus coming through the line of Shem. If you look at the story of Luke, Luke 3, give all the way from Genesis, it goes all the way to Jesus. It goes all through the table of nations, you know, through all the stories, and you come out with Jesus. And then in this, the Tower of Babel, you have God took the rebellion and confused the languages because of rebellion. But then he made propitiation, which means an exchange. He put his son in your place to die for your sins. And then he brings back all men in Acts 2 after Jesus died. He was dead for 40 days. He was appearing for 40 days after he died. He rose again on the third day. And then he appeared to the people for 40 days. And then came Pentecost. And Pentecost, he took all these people from the same table of nations. If you look at where their background is, it says this person from Mesopotamia, this person from, and they're all from the table of nations or in these areas. He brings them together, and they all speak different languages. But then when Peter was speaking, they understood what he said. So God made propitiation. He made a way for men to get saved from their rebellion. But then he brought all the men together to help them understand and open their hearts to the gospel through one language. So God's been working and working, and he's reversing Genesis, the curse of Genesis and the curse of the Tower of Babel to help all men understand the truth. And he wants you to know the truth. And what's radical is, I want to just bring up this book, Echoes of Ararat. Echoes of Ararat. This is a great book. And it talks about a collection of over 300 flood legends that are just in North and South America. 300 just in North and South America, that different tribes. And what's interesting is they don't just mention the flood, but they mention Babel and the confusion of languages in their civilization and their history. And these are people like the Shoshone Indians, the Eskimos, Indians in Canada, Indians in America, Indians in Central America, Indians or tribals in South America. And they're mentioning Babel. Why? Because they all dispersed from Babel to get there. They mention the creation story or some form of it. Like I said, it changes over time in their civilizations, but a lot of them get the details the same as the Bible. And some talk about dinosaurs and the Noahic flood and the giants. And then they also talk about the post-migration flood. And some of them even mention the long day. There's a day in Joshua where God made it longer so he can continue to battle. One even mentions that. And then also what they mention is the prophecies of Christ. There's prophecies of Christ that were handed down to these people in North and South America. And a lot of these people have this in their songs, in their traditions, in their culture, and they don't even realize what it's pointing to. So sometimes people ask that question, well, why would God let the Aborigine go to hell? Because he's already shared the gospel with them through their stories, through their civilizations, through their songs, through their hand-me-downs, know, through their elders. He's reaching out to people and he's reaching out to you with this video, with this video. And so Christ has come to die. He did die. And he's willing, he says, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And there's one day he is coming. He is coming back. And it says that Babylon, which is a picture of this worldly system, the immorality, the idolatry, the wickedness, and everything else that comes with it, false teaching, the money making, and he's going to cast it into the ocean. And these guys who made money from it are going to cry. They're going to, woe, woe, the great city, she who clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste, because God is going to throw her into the sea. God is going to crush her and all sin under his feet one day. And we have the opportunity to come to the Lord and ask him to help us, forgive us for following false ways. God says you don't be bound together with unbelievers. What does righteousness have to do with lawlessness? And what does light have to do with darkness? What does the temple of God have to do with idols? He does not. He says, come out from their midst, be separate. And he says, I will then be your father, and you will be my sons and daughters. So I hope you've learned a lot from this session, and I hope it opens up the door to your heart to dig down deeper for these studies, to look into them and to search them out. I would appreciate it if this has been helpful to subscribe to this channel, to give me a thumbs up, and to pass this video on to those you think it could help. Please leave your comments below. If you've heard about Babel, if you've seen some research, throw it down on the bottom for those in this community to share with one another. I'd appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining Die Hard Discipleship, where the rubber meets the road with your faith in God. God bless.